Hello and welcome everyone. Greetings from Istanbul on this afternoon. I am Emir Alışık, exhibition and event specialist at Anamet and part of the team who worked on the Palestine from Above exhibition. Palestine from Above, the new exhibition at Anamet, was originally planned to be opened with this panel in person, but since the exhibition opened, we have experienced a strange month in Istanbul, to say the least. So thank you for your patience, especially those who were expecting to attend this conversation a month ago. So today we are joined with several members of the curatorial team and two keynote speakers. The curators will speak in the first part of the panel, followed by a short Q&A, and then the keynote speeches. The day will close with another round of Q&A. So before I introduce the curatorial team, let me go over a few practicalities of this session. First, a reminder for Turkish speakers regarding the translations. Bu panel Türkçe'ye tercüme edilmektedir spontane olarak. Türkçe tercümeyi dinlemeyi tercih ediyorsanız ekranın altında interpretation tuşu göreceksiniz bir küre şeklinde. Oraya basıp Türkçeyi seçebilirsiniz. So please be advised that this session is being recorded. And finally, you may write your questions via Q&A button below the screen. Moderators will read them to the speakers as many as time allows. Another Turkish reminder that soruları Türkçe yazabilirsiniz. Moderatörümüz onu okuyacaktır, tercüme edilecek sorularda. Dolayısıyla İngilizce veya Türkçe soru yazabilirsiniz. So, let me continue by introducing the speakers of the first part of the panel. Zeynep Çelik is a historian of architecture, cities, and visual culture affiliated with Columbia University. Her scholarship focuses on the late Ottoman Empire and French colonies in North Africa. Her most recent book is Europe Knows Nothing About the Orient, A Critical Discourse from the East, 1872-1932. She is the recipient of prestigious awards, notably the Guggenheim Fellowship, the American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship, the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship, Doctor Honoris Causa, Boğaziçi University, the Whoopi Koch Award, Sarton Medal, Ghent University, the Giorgio Della Vida Award, UCLA, and the Tamayuz Award. Çelik's speech is titled Ottoman Modernity in the Desert. Yazid Anani is a senior curator at Art Jamil, Jeddah. He previously held the position of head curator and director of the public program at the A.M. Kattan Foundation in Ramallah from 2016 to 2024. He was a professor at Birzeit University, contributing to the Department of Architecture and the master's program in urban planning and landscape from 2007 to 2016. From 2010 to 2012, Anani chaired the Academic Council of the International Art Academy, Palestine, where he also taught from 2009 to 2015. He has curated and co-curated numerous exhibitions and contributed to various publications and lectures. Anani's speech is titled Aerial Documentary, a Site of Narrative Contestation. And finally, Salim Tamari is an Institute for Palestine Studies Senior Fellow and the former director of the Institute of Jerusalem Studies. He is the outgoing editor of Jerusalem Quarterly. He is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Birzeit University and has authored several works on urban culture, political sociology, biography, and the social history of the Eastern Mediterranean. Recent publications include Camera Palestina, Photography and the Silenced History of Palestine, and The Great War and the Remaking of Palestine. Tamari's speech is titled Coastal Sufi Religious Ceremonials and the Carnivalesque. Before I finish, on behalf of Anamet, I would like to thank all the contributors, speakers, and curators, those able to join us today, as well as those unable to do so, for their significant efforts for the exhibition and this panel today. Additionally, for permissions as well as logistical, financial, and moral support, we thank the Koç University, AM Kattan Foundation, the Vehbi Koç Foundation, and especially Ömer Koç. Before I hand the floor to Yazid and Zeynep for their short introductory pieces, I would also like to welcome the moderator of this session, Buket Coşkuner, the coordinator of this exhibition and our beloved former ANAMED manager. So thank you, and floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amir. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you hear me. I'm so pleased at the beginning to be here with all these brilliant minds on the panel today. And especially, I'm deeply grateful to ANAMED for hosting Palestine from above at this moment of profound urgency and reckoning. First presented at Kattan Foundation in Ramallah in September 2021, its second iteration arrives in Istanbul as the grotesque spectacle of a televised genocide in Gaza is normalized, and the global order, long eroded by imperial machinations, abandons even the pretense of upholding human rights, international treaties, or the fragile political mechanisms once designed to forestall tyranny and mass atrocity. This devastating reality demanded a re-examination of the exhibition's content, sharpening its relevance as the historical and contemporary forces shaping the Palestinian struggle converge with renewed ferocity. It unfolds amid a global escalation of censorship targeting Palestinian voices and those who stand in solidarity with them. Since October 7, 2023, a systematic effort to suppress Palestinian cultural expression has taken root across multiple fronts. Exhibitions shuttered, Palestinian artists disinvited, and cultural workers, whether Palestinians or their advocates, blacklisted, dismissed, or vilified for speaking against Israeli colonial onslaughts. Institutions that once professed commitments to intellectual and artistic freedom, such as universities, museums, and art spaces, have capitulated to power, enforcing a chilling silence meant to erase Palestinian narratives, histories, and the unalienable right to self-determination, dignity, and freedom. It is therefore with deep appreciation that I thank ANAMED again for their courage in opening this space for this exhibition, while so many others have shut their doors in silence. The exhibition was conceived to interrogate the colonial violence inscribed in the aerial gaze, but in the wake of recent horrors, its urgency has only deepened. The relentless use of AI-operated aerial warfare to annihilate Gazan cities and West Bank refugee camps has not only reduced them to rubble, it enacts their erasure from reality itself, expunging them from maps, language, international law, and the very architecture of global political discourse. What is at stake is not only the material obliteration of Palestinian life, but a systematic assault on its meaning, on its right to exist within a moral juridical framework that once claimed to govern our world. Palestine from Above is more than an exhibition. It's a testament to the enduring struggle of writing history and telling our stories, despite the colonial aerial gaze, geographical and cartographical deletion, enforced amnesia, and spatial control. To see how they see from above is to document, to archive, to expose, and to resist, because in the face of erasure, visibility is resistance and memory is persistence. Thank you.
Bringing Palestine from Above to Istanbul, 3 years after the closing of the exhibition in Ramallah, came with serious challenges. Most important is the tragic devastation in Gaza and the ongoing violence in the West Bank. As every day arrived with a new wave of bad news, we felt urged to address the current situation further, carrying the themes we had dealt with historically to the present day, to Turkey and to the broader world, I hope. I don't need to remind you of the situation in Palestine, but let me say a few words on the specificity of the Istanbul context. While the Turkish public support of Palestine cuts through diverse sectors of the society, knowledge of the land and its history, including the Ottoman era, is not necessarily profound. We thus humbly assume the responsibility to open up some significant windows onto Palestinian history from the late 19th century to the present through what we think are provocative materials. Here, I must underline the fact that the Istanbul exhibition is quite different than the Ramallah version, both in terms of contents and in terms of design. To address the transitions was a major challenge. We encountered many other challenges in curating the exhibition, the Istanbul version of Palestine from above. Let me give you a list of several of those. First, creating a balance and a dialogue between historic documents, which came from various archives, among them Ottoman, British, German, and Israeli archives. Archives do not convey objective truths, but are loaded with ideological messages. We were thus urged to triangulate them, consider the absences, and often read the documents against the grain. Another difficulty was to create a balance between the historic documents and contemporary artworks. We worked hard on that, and I think you'll be able to understand what we tried to do as we go on. Now, it was also difficult to work with teams and individuals from different geographies and time zones, from Ramallah, Amman, Istanbul, Cyprus, London, Berlin, New York. So our Zoom meetings were difficult to arrange, and they would last for 4, sometimes 5 hours. Then, of course, there is the situation in Palestine, the travel and transportation issues. Our Palestinian colleagues endured the routine torture to get out of the occupied territories. They passed through many checkpoints and the infamous Allenby Bridge to reach Jordan, from where they could fly to Istanbul. The travels of the artworks were just as torturous, but here we are in Istanbul. The exhibition is up. Now, I offer this shortened list of challenges not as an excuse for our shortcomings. We do not deny them, but as a humble reminder of the amount of complicated work that is hidden behind our exhibition. It would indeed be instructive to hold a meeting on the making of Palestine from above. I would like to mention at the outset that we will be talking about a few episodes covered in the exhibition. There are many more, so this is only to whet your appetite. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be with you here tonight, and great thanks to Animate and Koç University for having us on this august occasion. My talk will address the issue of how popular religious ceremonials provided a platform for modernist spectacle and nationalist mobilization in times of crisis. In Semitic monotheism, the struggle between good and evil was fought from high altitude. In Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, we have dramatic examples of those images of gazing from above. And I will see how to share with you. Okay. I think. So maybe I'm unable to share with you, but I'll continue with the presentation. Those gazes appear in the story of Jesus and the devil at the Mount of Temptation in Jericho. It appears with Moses at Mount Nebo, looking at the Holy Land from which he was denied entry as he completes the journey of the Israelites in their escape from Egypt. It appears in a most macabre form in Joshua's conquest of the Holy Land, when the sun stood still in Jabal, at Joshua's request, so his army can slay the native Amorites for the resistance. And finally, with Islam, we have the image of Al-Buraq, which is also the symbol of this exhibit in Istanbul, the female winged horse that carried the Prophet Muhammad in his heavenly journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, when he consulted the prophets Abraham, Moses, and Isaac. I'll make another attempt to share the, here we go. These religious themes are echoed by the technologies of gazing surveillance of the 20th and 21st century. In the modern period, the Bavarian State Archives provide us with a pivotal moment in the evolution of surveillance techniques and modes of control that came with the development of telegraph lines, railway construction, urban planning, cartography, and colonial control over the population of the Arab East. In this exhibit, we have examined the development of railroads in the struggle for control over the Levantine territories in the twilight of the Ottoman state. My interest here is to highlight the case of religious shrines and ceremonials, known as maqamat and mawasim. I will provide examples of how photographic surveillance intermingled with religious rituals. One involves the Bavarian photographic surveillance of Nebi Rubin's celebration on the shores of Jaffa in December 1917, where the British military camps were stationed in preparation for the conquest of Palestine. Can we have the next image, please? The one after that. Also, one more. That's it. A second example involves the Australian sketches of air combat dogfights with the German and Ottoman airplanes over the sites of Nebi Musa Shrine and the Dead Sea. Next, please. Popular veneration of saints and their shrines has deep historical roots in the Middle East. In Palestine, following the Crusades, Salah ad-Din started a tradition of mobilizing rituals of visitations and pilgrimage as a means of preempting the use of European pilgrimage to Jerusalem and the Holy Land during the Easter celebration as a hidden vanguard for military and demographic conquest. This strategy was particularly relevant to the Nebi Musa celebration, which took place between Jerusalem and Jericho during the month of March. The Nebi Musa celebrations, Jaffa in August, and St. George celebrations in Lydda and Bethlehem. The timing of these three ceremonials were synchronized with Russian and European Easter visitations to the Holy Land. After the defeat of the Crusades, Nebi Musa celebrations were revived as a festival aimed at mobilizing pilgrimage from Jaffa, Gaza, Ramle, and Lydda to preempt against the resurgence of European pilgrimage into a new crusade. Since the Mamluk period, Nebi Rubin became a Waqf-controlled event in Ramle and subsequently in Jaffa, in which Sufi participation exhibiting Sufi banners. There they are. Chants and dances predominated. In these celebrations, the pilgrims from Jaffa and Lydda carried a banner which proclaimed that God is one and Rubin is his prophet. La ilaha illallah wa Rubin nabiyullah. During the first half of the 20th century, the coastal cities became the area of contestation with settler colonialism. While Jerusalem was the administrative and religious capital, Jaffa became the economic capital and invigorated the whole country with debates about the future of Palestinian culture and politics. Jaffa and Haifa were also the areas of contested settlements by European colonies. First the Templars, who were German Messianic groups, then by the Zionists. The conflict between and within these cities was a conflict between two modernities. Nebi Musa Shrine Festival, taking place along the Rubin River south of Jaffa at the end of the summer, was, until 1946, the major site of mass visitation in all of coastal Palestine. Its status as the destination of popular pilgrimage was second only to the Mawsim of Nebi Musa at the outskirts of Jericho. Its early history suggests Rubin to be a regional trading fair in the Philistine plains and a cultic ritual worship center of Baalism, celebrated the betrothal of the sweet water of the Rubin River to the Mediterranean Sea, that is, to the sweet, to the salt. Janot, the French archaeologist, suggested that Rubin was originally the site of ancient Semitic gods, the Canaanite Baal and the Phoenician Rosafit. In this picture, you see a Jaffa resident celebrating the sweet and salt water in a Baalist kind of demeanor from the 1940s. There is no doubt that the Sufi orders that celebrated Rubin were aware of the biblical roots of the prophet and his shrine. This is attested in the inscription at Rubin, at the Rubin tomb, as the eldest son of Jacob the patriarch, as well as the use of the Star of David as an emblem of the Sufi banners in their procession. To these orders, as with Nabi Musa and Nabi Saleh, those saints had an essential Islamic progeny. At the height of the season, in the 30s and 40s, Rubin mushroomed into a tent city of 40,000. Next, please. The maqam now included a police station, a health clinic, a dental clinic, clothing market, bakeries, cafes, and a number of Egyptian theatrical groups and entertainers who used the frequent encampment of Rubin in the season. A number of participants recall having their honeymoon being spent at the Mawsim. Many of those accounts note the participation of local Jews and Christians during the season. But it was the Ottomans who transformed those religious ceremonial events into a routinized worldly celebration during the spring, summer, and autumn seasons. During the Mandate period, the Nabi Musa celebrations reverted to its communal and nationalist mode as an anti-British, anti-Zionist event. But the rituals of Rubin failed to follow this nationalist direction. It remained a carnivalesque event, releasing the repressed yearnings of the masses in a public extravaganza of music, dance, and mundane commercial activities. One of the main victims of these claims and impositions in the case of Nebi Rubin and other Old Testament shrines is the demise of a historical practice in Palestine, where the communal sharing of shrines and their seasonal ceremonials had heralded the promise of an overlapping shared identity in society at large, where neighborhood, social difference, and one's religious identity did not come into conflict with each other, but reinforce a communal urban space that came to be renewed every spring. Thank you.
Projects of infrastructural modernity in the Ottoman Empire have raised some interest among historians for a few decades now. The focus was, with few exceptions, on the capital Istanbul, for understandable reasons, led by the accessibility and quantity of sources. However, the scene has been expanding. A few episodes in this exhibition cast light on the modernity of the late Ottoman Empire from unlikely places and perspectives, shifting the scholarly focus on Istanbul to new directions and challenging the idea that Palestine was a backward area. They involve three key developments, all dating from the early 20th century: urban planning, infrastructure, and museology. We examine these projects in their historic context, but also bring them to the present day in their current physicality and as they survive in collective memory. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, hocam, but you need to start the...
I know. Just a second. Is it full screen now?
Yes.
Okay, good. A photography album from Bahattin Öztuncay's collection introduces us to a town in the Negev desert, Bir Sebi, Beersheba. This town was built according to a grid iron plan and with a social and political agenda. Paralleling turn-of-the-century attempts in other Arab provinces and Anatolia, but arguably surpassing them in its ambitions, Bir Sebi was designed to settle the Bedouin community in the region, to bring order and civilization, in quotes, and to improve the living conditions, all accompanied by new aesthetic standards. At the center of the grid, right here at this point in the plan, was a carefully designed public park. It was surrounded by buildings that represented the empire and its multiple missions. A government mansion, Hükümet Sarayı, housed the official functions. A post office connected the small town to the empire, to the entire empire. A hospital catered to much-needed healthcare. A high school emphasized the importance of education, and a mosque brought the spiritual aspects of the local culture together with the profane functions around it. By 1915, there was even a cinema. A railway line connected Bir Sebi to the broader network. An electrical power station, which played a significant role in extracting water from the old wells, and a printing press completed the repertoire of official buildings. The latter was the home of an illustrated bi-weekly, Musavver Çöl, with Halide Edip Hanım serving as an honorary editor. You can read her name here, Halide Edip Hanımefendi. Stylistically, the buildings conveyed clear messages. While the school and the hospital were in contemporary universal styles, the model for the mosque was Mamluk, hence a nod to the architectural heritage of the region. The novelty of the scheme was underlined by photographs taken from heights. Bir Sebi may have entered world history as the site of a major battle during World War I, yet it offers a remarkable lens to understand the transformation in Ottoman imperial policies. Modernity and imperialism in the desert dated back. The emphasis on infrastructure is further revealed in the documentation of the Man-Haifa branch of the Hijaz Railway in another exquisite album dating from 1905. This one is from Ömer Koç's collection. As part of Sultan Abdülhamid II's pan-Islamic policies, the Hijaz Railroad aimed to facilitate the annual pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, but it did a lot more than that and connected different regions of the empire. Traversing the complicated and beautiful landscapes of Palestine, the project called for major interventions to the land and to technologically cutting-edge structures. Organized in a systematic manner in the album, that is according to the point each is taken and measured from the land to sea, the photographs flaunted the Ottoman imperial pride, and I think these photographs, especially this one on the left, shows it with that hand pointing to the railroad. They recorded the newly opened tunnels, the bridges constructed at topographically difficult locations, and train stations. Capitalizing on the mountainous terrain, photographers captured the infrastructure project and the land from above, proudly displaying both. This is before airline photography. Ottoman officers and workers appeared in the photographs, bringing a human touch to the collective image and reiterating the imposition of imperial power on Palestine. Controlling and displaying antiquities constitute the third moment of modernity. Okay. The third moment of modernity in Palestine that I will discuss. The excavations were done by foreign teams, but according to the stipulations of Ottoman antiquity laws from 1869, 1874, 1884, 1907, they were conducted under the supervision of Ottoman officials. Each law was refined upon the flaws of the previous one and became more and more prohibiting, leading to loud complaints from Western archaeologists who were forced to collaborate with Ottomans. According to the laws, selected artifacts from the excavations were transported to the Museum of Antiquities in Istanbul. Çinili Köşk that you see on the left is sheltered part of the archaeological museum's collections. And on the right, we see a statue from Gaza, referred to as the Zeus of Gaza. It is situated in the gallery of the tiled kiosk. However, a branch of the Imperial Museum was also opened in Jerusalem in 1901, inside a newly built high school, the Mamuniye. On the left, you see an exterior view of the high school, and on the right, you have a plan. And I do not know where, in which room the museum was, but most likely it was on the ground floor and most likely in one of these larger rooms. Sheltering local artifacts, the small museum grew over time under the British and the Israeli rule, moving several times and finally end up as the Rockefeller Museum. Its original history faded into the past, largely by the rarity of archival data. We looked in vain for documentation comparable to the two projects I introduced earlier, the new town of Bir Sevi and the Haifa branch of the Hijaz Railway. Instead, we found bits and pieces about archaeology, that is several photographs, notices in newspapers, and brief mentions in Salnames and Başbakanlık Archive. Palestine Exploration Fund was the major archaeological research group in the region. Among its excavations conducted between 1902 and 1912 was Gezer, Tel El Jazar, near the Palestinian village of Abu Shusha. Gezer is remembered as the site of a horrific massacre against the Palestinians in Abu Shasha in 1948. and the subsequent establishment of 2 Israeli settlements here. The remains of the so-called abandoned village were destroyed in 1965 as part of an Israeli operation. Our exhibition gives you glimpses of other haunting stories intertwined with antiquities. Thank you.
Hello again. In my part, I will explore how some of the documentary-based art forms showcased in this exhibition, including photography, maps, films, and paintings, have been utilized by artists to both expose and resist colonial-centric discourse. Conversely, colonial regimes obviously have historically instrumentalized documentary-based art as a means to legitimize and entrench their hegemonic narratives. The talk examines a thread of artworks in the different chapters of this exhibition, unraveling how the documentary in these works becomes a contested site where hegemony is simultaneously unveiled in its multiplicity and resisted. Historically, the documentary form has been intricately tied to the colonial project, functioning as both a military and ethnographic tool to gather data, understand, and ultimately control indigenous populations. Gustav Dahlmann, you see him kneeling in the image, the German ethnographer and theologist, devoted considerable effort between 1902 until 1917 to documenting Palestinian customs, dialects, agricultural practices, and social and religious traditions. His intricate survey framed Palestinian communities exclusively within a pastoral identity, reducing them to a static and romanticized image of agrarian life. His meticulous collection of data and imagery is implicitly framed from a white European model superiority, relegating Palestinians to the role of the other, the studied, the observed, and the documented. This hierarchy is further reflected in some of Dahlmann's photographic and artistic experimentation on glass slides found in his collection, including retouching Mawasim photographs, the Mawasim that Salim has mentioned, and etching or scratching floral images. While it remains unclear whether Dahlmann himself executed these alterations, these methods transformed images of the landscape, its people, floral and cultural rituals into objects of artistic manipulation. Dahlmann's aesthetical experimentation paralleled his impulse to situate Palestinians and their landscape as objects of study, catalogued, classified, and stripped of agency. By aestheticizing the documented subjects, the German classification of the Palestinian indigenous population perpetuated their framing within a static and backward narrative. On the other hand, aerial photography is the epitome of the colonial gaze, an omniscient, disembodied perspective that flattens lived geographies into lifeless, mapped, surveyed, and ultimately conquered spaces. The composite images of the Australian photographer Frank Hurley, along with the drawings and paintings by other Australian artists such as the Carlyle brothers, who were also conscripted into the army in World War I, glorifying the imperial conquest by depicting Australian and British victories in Palestine. These works reduce the Palestinian landscape to a backdrop of imperial heroism and triumph while portraying the defeat of Ottoman forces. Through his composite photographs, Hurley altered reality on the ground, often capturing scenes from airplanes and on-ground military operations where Palestinian people and their cultural landscape were absent, as though they had disappeared or being rendered invisible under the colonial gaze. In contrast, Amr al-Shomali's and Dia al-Azze piece, The Orient Flight of the Graf Zeppelin over Palestine, which was back in 1931, reconstructs the Imperial German aerial gaze on the Holy Land, attempting to unravel its represented narrative. By using animation, composed of archival films, photographs, and diaries from the original Orient flight, their artwork breathes life into the historical moment of the Zeppelin journeying over Palestine. The work exposes yet again how Palestinians are excised, while the Holy Land is reframed through the aesthetic tropes of Orientalist exoticism, biblical tourism, and a fascination with the emergent Zionist settlements of that time. As for another work in the exhibition, which talks about monuments, this monument, which is an Australian light horse memorial in Beersheba, solidify a particular historical narrative into stone. Installed in 2008 and designed by Meridian Sculpture, the monument features an Australian light horse trooper and his Waller mount, proudly commemorating the Anzac triumph in the Battle of Beersheba in 1917, mentioned by my colleague Zeynep. It also attests to the power of writing history and shaping its representations through public monuments, transforming this particular site into a centerpiece of Australian wartime legacy. The monument holds a quasi-religious status in Australian collective memory, a moment when Australians and the whole world first recognized the distinct qualities that defined Australia as a people and a nation. The Australian Light Horse Memorial intertwines Australian nationalism with the Zionist foundation of the Jewish colonial state, projecting a vision of shared triumph over a common enemy. The joint Israeli-Australian annual celebrations surrounding the monument further illustrate how Anzac identity is deeply enmeshed with Zionist ideology, embedding this conflated narrative within contemporary geopolitical framework. As for Jack Pazakian's work, which juxtaposes archival photographs from an Ottoman imperial album, which documents the construction of the Daraa Haifa Hijazi Railway under the Sultan Abdul Hamid II, which was mentioned also by my colleague Zeynep. It juxtaposes these historical photographs with contemporary images that has been captured by Jack from the exact same location. The newly captured images evoke an unsettling eeriness. They depict mountainous landscapes that are floral, lush, and vivid, yet conspicuously devoid of people or cultural markers that might indicate human presence. While these images might initially seem to perpetuate the Orientalist or Zionist trope of empty, untouched landscapes, Pazakian's layered compositions resist this narrative. The overlaid Ottoman photographs capturing the labor involved in the railway's construction, and are tinted, of course, in pale, faded tones, imbued the recent photographs captured by Jack with a sense of life and historical depth. Pazakian's superimpositions evoke tension between past and present that exposes the ideological depiction of the land and the cultural suppression inherent in the Zionist narrative. His work challenges viewers to confront the implications of the obliteration of Ottoman modernizing and labor-intensive heritage, leaving behind only remnants and relics. Well, the artwork raises several questions. Does this erasure celebrate the beauty and resilience of today's landscape, dismissing the historical layers as irrelevant and suggesting that the land's significance lies in its timelessness? Or does it instead critique the deliberate erasure of these histories, reasserting that anything other than a Jewish biblical landscape has been systematically rendered invisible? On the other hand, the aestheticization of absence exemplified in Orientalist art depictions in the city of Jerusalem by David Roberts, also from the Omer Koch collection, serves as a precursor to the Zionist narrative of a land without a people, for a people without a land. A reference to Mark Twain's The Innocent Abroad, a diary of his 1867 excursion through Europe and the Holy Land. Twain's description of the holy landscapes framed them as barren and uninhabited, an idealized and sanitized image that has been used to reinforce the perception of Palestine as a pristine yet vacant territory awaiting civilization and control. In stark contrast, Sophie Halabi's painting and sketches of Jerusalem disrupt these Orientalist visions. Her intimate human-scale depictions present her hometown not as an empty mythical space, but as a lived city. Through her personal and impressionistic lens, she captures the rhythms and textures of Jerusalem and its landscape, offering a counter-narrative rooted in lived experience. Forensic architecture, on the other hand, The Destruction and Return in Araqib, the title of the video, employs cameras on kites to document the presence of Palestinian Bedouins in Al-Araqib, amidst countless Israeli efforts to erase them. These acts of resistance directly challenge the Israeli government's reliance on British and German aerial photographs, which have been judicially used to deny the existence of Palestinian villages pre-1948. The imagery captured by the Palestinians revealed that what had been rendered invisible in the archival aerial photographs. What the Israeli government dismissed as dark, insignificant pixels turned out to be graveyards, manure-stained patches of soil marking the location of livestock pens, cultivated lands, caves, unmistakable traces of life and history. This low-tech yet insurgent act of visual resistance reclaims the aerial views as a site of counter-forensics, producing alternative visual evidence to contest Israel's judicial claim and subvert its hegemonic deployment of aerial photography as an instrument of erasure. Similarly, Mahmoud al-Hajj's digital work reflects on the erasure of Palestinian bodies and histories through his personal documentation of life in Gaza before and after the genocide, employing a counter-forensic artistic approach. His work plays with notions of visibility and digital representation by challenging the politics of erasure and reinterpreting news footage and social media content through his personal voice, narratives, and forensic interventions. In order to tell his story, Al-Hajj engages with fragments of suppressed and distorted digital media to construct alternative narratives that resist mass media manipulation.
Yazid?
These are the last slide.
Oh, okay.
These artworks and many more in the exhibition at Anamed do not merely document reality. They reimagine it, unsettling the constructed logic of colonial narratives and representations and offering new ways of seeing. As we engage with these works, the struggle for visibility remains not just about being seen, but about who documents, who narrates, whose story is being told, and the means by which the visuals are circulated. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Çelik, Professor Tamari, Professor Anani, for your presentations. I am Buket, moderator of the session. I also extend my welcome to our online participants. Greetings from Istanbul. We have 20 minutes for the Q&A session of the first part of the panel. As you know, just to remind you, you can write your questions and comments to chat box, and I will read aloud on behalf of the attendees. Let me check if there is any yet. Okay. Let me take the privilege of being the moderator to ask the first question. I'd like to start the session with a few words about the latest situation in Palestine with a follow-up question. On the 18th of March, the opening day of the exhibition, the so-called ceasefire was terminated. About 500,000 more people have been displaced since then. The entire Gaza Strip is under a total siege. Israel's state is blocking all food, water, medical equipment, and humanitarian aid. The humanitarian disaster reached its catastrophic levels in front of our eyes. One of the main missions of ANAMET as a research center is to foster scientific discussion and talks among the scholars, also with the larger public. And now we shouldn't remain silent about the ongoing genocide in Gaza, Jenin, and other Palestine camps. Palestine from Above exhibition and this panel is a joint effort together with its curators, speakers, and the whole exhibition team to stand in solidarity with Palestine. Don't stop talking about Palestine. After my very personal explanation as one of the exhibition team members on why Palestine from Above exhibition and its panel is needed, I want to start our conversation asking a very basic question about the exhibition itself, not the presentations. The first question is to Zeynep Çelik, because she is the driving force behind the project, and she is the one who brought exhibition team and institutions together. Zeynep Hocam, can you explain some more? Why did you feel obliged to revisit the exhibition after 3 years?
Thank you, Buket, also for your kind words. As things got more and more unacceptable in Palestine, I was talking to Yazid, and we really thought that we should get this exhibition somewhere outside Palestine, so that its messages reached larger crowds. Istanbul was a natural place, and ANAMET was very generous. We thank you all. But there is a problem with this transition. Every day, something more awful happens in Palestine, and we cannot keep up with the developments with the disasters, I should say, in order to update the exhibition. So the exhibition ends somewhere, but I think the story is continuing, and we should treat the exhibition as an open-ended story. I don't know if this answers your question, but the difference is quite significant between the Ramallah version and the Istanbul version. Of course, the Istanbul version had to deal with the Ottoman context as well. It is related to us in some ways, in many ways.
Thank you. I think in the course of our conversations, we will continue discussing some more about why now, why Istanbul. But thank you, Zeynep Hocam. I'm checking the Q&A box, but so far no questions, so I'll continue my questions. My second question is to Yazid Anani. And these first questions are more about the exhibition's background behind the scenes. So Yazid, paintings, drawings done from the surrounding heights, photographs taken from the planes, and then images taken from the satellites, now drone footage, but always from above. How did you realize Palestine, the object of human desire for ages, gazed from above? How did you decide to use above as a leitmotif of the exhibition?
Thank you so much, Bouquet. I think it's really important maybe to start from the beginning, where the idea of the whole first exhibitions, first iteration of the exhibition arrived. And it was sitting with Salim Tamari, of course, looking at images from the Bavarian archive, which was taken from 1916 to 1919. And these aerial images were very peculiar to me because they show an area of Al-Bire where I lived for a while, which is a city close to Ramallah, a twin city to Ramallah. And we're looking from above, from the eyes of the German pilot on our landscape where I lived my childhood. And it looked so strange because all the intimate details of the landscape that I remember from my childhood does not really appear from there. So I was discussing with Salim at that time how these intimate details that define our relationship from the ground, from the landscape where we're standing and looking and living the experience, living our lives as Palestinians on this landscape, it disappears. And how the German pilot, when he took that particular image in that particular moment, does not see that relationship. All he does see is a tactical attribute of the land in terms of the mountains, the archaeological sites, the military installations, etc., but do not see the intimacy and memory of land and the experience of our life. And therefore, I was questioning of that two different gazes, the gaze of the technology from above, and which is always the technology of the colonial regime or the military, it has to do with military hegemony and occupation, and us from the land where we living everyday life. And I say, what is the two different perspective? And therefore we thought Palestine from above is something would really be a nice name for the exhibition, while the content of the exhibition should really talk about the subversion of that gaze from the sky and sort of dismantling that kind of power structure from the ground by means of telling the story of the Palestinians from the eye view, or the gaze from the human perspective, living on the in the landscape.
Thank you. We have a question from Gülpulhan. Maybe you can continue this one. Will the exhibition travel to another country, city after Istanbul?
Well, this is really a very important question because as Zeynep Çelik mentioned, and as I mentioned also in the introductory section, I think it's difficult now in these days. The word Palestine is a forbidden name, a forbidden word, especially in Europe and in the United States and the global North. And I think there's so many spaces would really reject such an exhibition. And therefore, I'm so thankful to Anamed for opening up and being courageous enough to say yes for this exhibition. So while other spaces are closing on exhibitions like these, narrating Palestinian stories and putting the Palestinian narrative up front, I think other spaces are closing. So yes, of course, we are trying to push for this exhibition to go elsewhere, and with the help of you, of course, everyone, and maybe people on the panel, if they can really arrange or help in arranging that, that would really be helpful. Maybe Zeynep can really contribute to that as well.
I'm getting a little hopeful about this because I see the demonstrations even in the United States here and elsewhere in the world. Yes, the governments are extremely allergic to the word Palestine and Palestinian struggle and Gaza. people are changing their minds. There's a lot of support for the Palestinian cause right now. And who knows, if not to the have to be in Europe or the United States.
So we are quite open to the idea, right? Okay. Let's continue with some questions about your presentations. I have a question to Professor Tamari. Salim Hocam, your presentation on Mawasims draws attention to Palestinian culture, lives, a history from the bottom up, inside out. How do you conduct your research? Which methodology are you using?
Thank you for this. Well, the material for Maqamat Mawasim is extensively covered both in folk literature and in some ethnographic material. Most recently, the work of Tawfiq Kan'an, who is probably the #1 ethnographer of early century Palestine, became available in many languages. And he is a major source of these practices of saints' shrines and ceremonials. There's a German ethnographer who's much more well-known internationally by the name of Gustav Dahlmann, who published a 10-volume material called Arbeit und Sitte in Palestine in German. And it also examines popular religion in Palestine. Luckily, that material is only in German, and recently it's been translated to Arabic, but so you only restricted by these 2 volumes. Luckily, there is a plethora of ethnographic societies in the Middle East and in Palestine which have begun to focus on folk practices, some for nationalist reasons, some for scientific reasons. And I was privileged to be associated with a group called the Palestinian Ethnography Group in Beirut, which began its work in 1973. And we have been collecting a lot of material on this, which was recorded into tape recordings, sound recordings, more recently video recordings. I know that we have with us Dr. Rana Barakat, who is the curator, director of the Palestine Museum in Birzeit University, and she's been leading work to examine the study of ethnographic material from the work of Tawfiq Kan'an. And that has not been published yet, but that material is a major source for us to examine these folk practices.
Thank you, Professor Tamari. Okay, without further ado, let's continue to the second part of the panel. Before leaving the floor to the moderator of the session, to our curator, Yazid Anani, I'd like to introduce our keynote speakers, Hanan Toukan and Rana Barakat, briefly. Hanan Toukan is Associate Professor in the Philosophy, Politics and Economics program at the American University of Beirut Mediterranean Cyprus campus, and Associate Professor of Politics and Middle East Studies at Bard College, Berlin, on leave now. Her research sits at the intersection of Middle Eastern studies, international politics, critical theory, political theory, colonial, post-colonial studies, and visual cultures. Her writings are concerned with the political and social roles art and cultural institutions play in our lives. The function of art in international politics, museums and exhibitionary practices, migration and the movement of art objects, and the politics of knowledge production in and about the memories, displacements, histories, and ecologies of global South contexts. She was previously visiting assistant professor of Middle East Studies at Brown University and visiting professor of cultural studies of the Middle East at Bamberg University. Her work has appeared in Radical Philosophy, After All, Cultural Politics, Journal of Visual Cultures, International Journal of Cultural Studies, and Perspectives on Politics, amongst others. Her book, The Politics of Art, Dissent and Cultural Diplomacy in Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, was published with Stanford University Press in 2021. She serves as an editorial member of the Journal of Visual Culture Collective and on the editorial committee of Jerusalem Quarterly. The title of Hanan Toukan's talk is The Banality of Discourse and the Ills of Representation on Archiving Palestine after Gaza. Rana Barakat is an associate professor of history of Birzeit University and director of Birzeit University Museum in Palestine. Her research interests include the history and historiography of colonialism, nationalism, and cultures of resistance. She earned her PhD in history from the University of Chicago and has published in notable venues, including the Journal of Palestine Studies, Jerusalem Quarterly, Settler Colonial Studies, and Native American and Indigenous Studies. Her forthcoming book, Ongoing Return, Mapping Memory and Storytelling in Palestine, advances an indigenous understanding of time, space, and memory in Palestine by focusing on the details of the people and place of Lifta village over time. She is currently working on her next book, The Burak Revolt, Constructing a History of Resistance in Palestine, which argues that this 1929 revolt was the first sign in the Mandate period of sustained mass resistance to the settler colonial project, including direct and rhetorical actions against both political Zionism and British imperialism, planting seeds of mass political mobilization. Rana Barakat's speech is titled Palestine from Below, Thinking Through Different Perspectives. Now I'm turning over the microphone to Yazid, the moderator of the second part of the panel.
Well, thank you, Bukat. And I think we'll start with Hanan, if you're ready.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I just want to extend thank you specifically to Yazid, Zeynep, the other Zeynep, Salim, as the curatorial team and sort of the creative mind behind all of this. And of course, the amazing team at Anamed, including Ibrar, Bukat, and all the others. Thank you so much for having us. And of course, this opportunity to discuss so many important questions. So for my paper today, let me just start by saying that I'm very happy to hear that I'm actually going to be touching a lot of on some of what has been said already by our speakers. So I sort of pick up on some of these points. So specifically, what I do want to discuss today is the delicate question of how we are to address the now well-known historical uses and abuses of the colonial representations of Palestine, along with the responses to them, against the backdrop of the genocidal mass atrocities and ethnic cleansing occurring against the Palestinian people. The specific question I aim to explore is, as Palestinian writers, artists, archivists, and scholars who refuse to be erased, Do we need, in the face of the current attempt to eradicate us, a fundamental shift in our historical and traditional responses to the often top-down constructed narratives and perceptions surrounding the land of Palestine and its people? Or do we stick with what we have been doing all along, which is remembering, documenting, archiving, collecting, speaking back, and many times explaining? While efforts to annihilate the Palestinian body, mind, and indeed land are underway as we speak, spending time trying to counter the typical colonial representations of Palestinian lives can become entangled in and reinforce the very structures they aim to undermine. One may provocatively argue, for example, that examining the top-down and often skewed and racialized colonial representations of Palestine from an aerial perspective, such as the Palestine from the Sky exhibition, as an example, and speaking back to them is in fact but a mere distraction. As the writer Toni Morrison so eloquently put it, the very serious function, colonial racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, and you spend 20 years proving that you do. Somebody says your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Somebody says you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdom, so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing, end quote. Building on, but also departing from Morrison's distraction framework during this time of unapologetic and indeed endorsed annihilation of the Palestinian people, which is in essence the pinnacle of the condition of Western racism and its racialized politics of divisiveness, I question whether we can continue to do what we have been doing all along to expose the injustice we have had to endure. Is there perhaps another way to retell this story, as this exhibition so eloquently does through its analysis of how aerial views have been used for various purposes that include surveillance, mapping, and colonial control? Should we shift gears perhaps and respond to the catastrophe of our time in a different way? What can we learn from our past of defending our history in the face of consistent fabrication, forgery, and selection of facts and the selection of facts and evidence? We have relied until now on collecting, preserving, and the insistence on owning our memory. Has it been enough? Can we do more, and can we do it differently? Here, the archive is of essence. I would look there and explore it for answers, precisely because the Palestinian people have, consciously or not, chosen to gather it and nurture it, whether consciously or not, as their primary method of resistance since the beginning of their colonial encounter, and whether through diaries, collection storytelling, or artifact preservation, for example. In fact, I feel safe to venture that from the Palestinian perspective, their archive is not only an essential step toward liberation, but the very act of making it, writing about it, engaging it, and indeed feeling it is an emancipatory act in and of itself. I think here of a conversation that appears in George Orwell's 1984 that is more relevant than ever. In one scene in part 3 of the book, during an interrogation revolving around the nature of memory, reality, and truth, O'Brien, the interrogator, using techniques of torture and psychological pressure, asks Winston Smith, the book's protagonist and a mid-level worker responsible for rewriting historical records in the Ministry of Truth, if, in his opinion, the past has any real existence or significance. Until this moment, he asks, and I'm quoting, you had never considered what is meant by existence. I will put it more precisely. Does the past exist concretely in space? Is there somewhere or other a place, a world of solid objects where the past is still happening? End quote. Winston replies in the negative, and O'Brien, feeling frustrated, presses him some more. Then where does the past exist, if at all? In records, it is written down, explains Winston. In records, and, continues O'Brien, clearly irritated at this point, in the mind, in human memories, Winston elaborates. In memory. Very well then, counters O'Brien. We, the party, control all records and we control all memories. Then we control the past, do we not? But how do you stop people remembering things? It is involuntary. It is outside of itself. How can you control memory? You have not controlled mine, cries out Winston. Interestingly, in the case of the Palestinians, O'Brien's aspirations to dismiss and silence the memories and realities held by the human mind and upheld by the regimes of thought have not been met with success. Observing the cataclysmic events of a rising consciousness and a recommitment to international law unfolding on our streets, in our classrooms, and within our labor and trade unions, with deep repercussions felt across corporate media, legal and governmental institutions, reveals that the question of Palestine and the Palestinians are challenging the very foundations upon which the Western self-conception as free, fair, democratic, and based on a rules order that has historically been constructed and propagated. More, despite nearly 100 years of relentless efforts to erase its narrative and the accelerated form of attempted extinction over the past year and a half, first in Gaza and now the West Bank, the story of Palestine not only endures but continues to thrive. From the early days of the colonial encounter, Palestinians have understood at a very visceral level that Israel would attempt what O'Brien in 1984 hopes will materialize, for they collected and stored and kept diaries. While growing up, I often explored my grandmother's chest of drawers, leafing through her pictures and magazines and newspaper cutouts. Late at night, when everyone was sleeping, I would delve into my late father's family pictures and notes, all the while wondering, why did they, like many Palestinians dispersed in Palestine and outside of it, feel the need to obsessively capture their memories and store them, even if they do not always share them and keep them hidden away in drawers and closets? I have come to realize this past year that the need to collect is done for a different reason than I first assumed. They do not store their knowledge to speak back to the media and the academia that has, for the most part of the last 100 years, ill-intentionally misrepresented them. Nor are they interested in explaining to the colonizers and their allies what truly happened in 1948. They are confident in their understanding of their histories of injustice. It was Gaza that made me realize that my grandmother likely did not feel the need to explain to the perpetrators that their actions will never be accepted, never be forgotten or normalized, or that the great forgery of a supposedly non-existent Palestinian presence that is intrinsic to the European project of the construction of Israel will never make their efforts at eradication any more palatable. To be clear, Palestinians understand their future does not hinge on making European and North American governments and their complicit media comprehend or acknowledge their plight. They recognize that Europe especially is aware of the circumstances, for it played a central role in the inception of the problem in the first place. Exactly as the Palestine from Above exhibition meticulously demonstrates, there is an abundance of detailed documents uncovered by Palestinian and Israeli historians alike, as some of the people here with us tonight, detailing the historical dispossession and loss faced by the Palestinians, even prior to the Nakba, when Christian Zionists first began to imagine a place to dislocate the Jews of Europe to, a place in their imagining that emanates, to quote Kaiser Wilhelm in 1889 as an example, light and splendor from which the German nation becomes great and glorious, which is also quoted from the exhibition catalog. Hence, from the Palestinian perspective, what we now call the counter-archive is not only an essential step toward liberation, but the act of creating it, writing about it, and engaging with it is an emancipatory process in itself. I was not privy to the discussions and decisions that first went into the making of this glorious exhibition, but I do imagine that creating this detailed archive that essentially documents how seemingly neutral aerial imagery has in fact been used to control and represent the Palestinians requires deep involvement and vigilance. The act of transforming what many Palestinians have witnessed and physically experienced in the past into a tangible form today, as this exhibition does, by organizing, packaging, and safeguarding that history for future generations, is an empowering job precisely because it insists on the continuation of life and presence despite the destruction. The endeavor to slow down, collect, meticulously gather, then document and reread the colonial archive continues despite the realization that the diplomatic world conveniently chooses to deny what they see. Today, the act of witnessing, collecting, and archiving is no longer aimed at convincing Western perspectives, as it has been in times like the decade of the 1990s and the early 2000s, when the colonial presence in Palestine was made more palpable for international onlookers through treaties and pretenses at diplomatic peacemaking between the so-called two equal sides in so-called a conflict. Rather, in the face of accelerated and more direct attempts at ethnic cleansing and genocide, it has evolved since into a means of ensuring that future generations not only always remember their history, but that they have the methodological, technical, and indeed intellectual skills to continue recording it. Safeguarding historical accounts like Palestine from the Sky ensures that future generations inherit the rich tapestry of their past, honor the victims, and preserve the legacy for future generations. It also allows them to learn the methodology of reading along the archival grain, as the anthropologist Laura Stolder put it, as a form of rejecting annihilation. Reading along with, rather than against the archival grain, encourages a deeper engagement with the textures of the archive and all that is hidden in its folds, precisely to expose well-intended distortions or contradictions for the simple reason of possible future justice. I would like to end by taking us briefly to the British military base, RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. Today, this long-standing remnant of British colonial rule, which has been normalized and regarded as dormant for the most part of the last 50 years, has become a target hotspot for anti-war campaigners over the past year and a half. This base, along with others on the small, quaint, sunny island where I'm now currently based, serves as a strategic hub for US and UK military operations that contribute to instability across the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean at large. As such, anti-war activists and campaigners have been meticulously tracking how British military surveillance planes, visible to the naked eye, are integrated with military planning, operations, and intelligence. These planes have been flying daily to Israel to assist in leveling Gaza. This further implicates, obviously, the UK in war crimes. As the original exhibition catalogue of Palestine from the Sky explains, the British used aerial photography to gather strategic information in both urban and rural areas for the suppression of the Arab Revolt, of the Great Arab Revolt of 1936-1939. Today, satellite and drone imagery has replaced aerial photography in controlling the skies, mapping the land, and surveying Palestine from above. Hence, this modern archival evidence collected by various groups highlights the continued collusion, not only in genocidal atrocities, but in the hopes of redrawing and reframing Palestinian geographies and movements. In that, a clear line between current events occurring under British auspices and actions from nearly 100 years ago can be seen. This is my last point. In 1993, Edward Said wrote that in the contemporary Middle East, our history is written mostly by foreigners. I'm quoting here. Our history is written mostly by foreigners, visiting scholars and intelligence agents. While we do the living, relying on personal and disorganized collective memory, gossip almost, plus the embrace of a family to take us forward in time, end quote. The first part of the sentence encapsulates what this show and Palestine from the Sky has demonstrated so breathtakingly. However, the second part of the sentence regarding how we continue to rely on informal and disorganized collective memory does not reflect in the meticulous counter-archive collected for the exhibition we are here to speak about today. Had Said lived longer, perhaps he would have seen the evidence over the past year and a half on the streets of the world, both in the global north and south. The educational, banking, social, and governmental institutions of the world's purported greatest liberal democracies have been shaken to their core because it has become ever more clear that the racialized project of Israel that their political elites created almost 100 years ago is no longer sustainable in its current form. This proves that what we have been doing and should continue to do all along by learning slowly to meticulously organize, gather, document, store, and exhibit in the way Michel Foucault conceptualized in his work on archaeology as writing a history of the present is actually working. It is proving successful, even if excruciatingly exhausting at times. What has now become a full-on globalized Free Palestine movement is powered by a capacity set in motion that can no longer be controlled. It is a crescendo of projects like this one that has been at work and growing since Said wrote his words. Palestinians no longer rely on personal or disorganized collective memory, like my grandmothers, to assert their presence. What the annihilation of the Palestinian people in its latest version in Gaza has made most clear is that the Palestinian narrative has continued to mature from the distractions of speaking back and countering Orientalist tropes to building a formidable archive of the historical fact and experience of ongoing dispossession and displacement through the racialized violence of ongoing colonialism. Above all, in rewriting the history of now and reframing the Western archive to reveal its violent colonial nature, Palestine not only teaches us about itself, as it becomes less concerned with explaining and justifying, but also about the world we inhabit, the values we ascribe meaning to, and the humanity we claim to defend. Given the circumstances of the past year and a half especially, that is a miraculous defeat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hanan, for the wonderful talk, and especially putting the dichotomy between the question of what to do today versus the perpetuation of the continuation of documentation, recording, safeguarding, and what does it mean for us today, and the issue of time and how is this really slowly is building through time, and its relevance to what is happening today. I think this is really essential, and we might draw on some of the discussion around these notions that Hanan was presenting after we hear from Rana's presentation. So I'll leave it to Rana to entertain us.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Yazid, for this generous invitation. It is my distinct honor to be amongst these distinguished voices. I want to thank everyone who made this possible, and all of the loving labor that brought Palestine from above, from Ramallah to Istanbul. I would like to thank Yazid Anani in particular for his commitment to listening. For conversations with Yazid have become a coveted part of my life, and I shall consider whatever intervention I make today as part and parcel of our ongoing conversations. I want to thank the labor of the team at Animate, and it is my honor to be here with Hanan and Yazid and Zeynep and Salim, thinking about Palestine from above, and as I titled my intervention, thinking about what it may mean to think about Palestine from below. Palestine, and in particular Gaza, is under a rain of bombs, and the skies over Palestine reflect the burning on the ground. It is clear now in 2025 that Palestine is the site where the old world is ending, quite literally on fire, and it is where we are making a new world. The apocalypse is not something to ponder, but rather something to survive, and this catastrophe is neither new nor exceptional to Palestine. It has been a catastrophe for over a century, and as Shireen Saikali reminds us, and that through horror, we do see more. Shireen shares, and I quote, "We see how Palestinians wrest life from death, hope from despair, and cohesion from fragments. And this demands that we understand and reside in grief, for grief is a portal," end quote. And so from above to from below, through and with history, I ask, what can looking up from the ground offer us in terms of a horizon, from the past through this bloody genocidal present and into possible futures? Palestine from above, in part, traces the intricacies and nuances of long history. It perhaps flips the script and asks questions about representation in ways that both add to the historical register as well as work as a provocation to it. Today, my intervention will cover three main points: above and below, mapping and control, and genocide. And hopefully, most importantly, to echo Hanan, not to counter nor respond, but to think otherwise, in the past and in the present. In The Potter, the Poet, and the Storyteller, Palestine from Above, the title of one of his introductions to the special issue of Jerusalem Quarterly, 2 volumes, 81 and 82, which served the first iteration as the exhibition's book, Yazid Anani wrote, and I'm actually repeating what he said earlier, but I shall quote him anyway. The idea of the exhibition Palestine from Above came while Salim Tamari and I were investigating one of the aerial images of Elbira from the Bavarian State Archives. We were trying to demystify the location of the mysterious railway, which was constructed at the end of World War I between Jerusalem and the Balur area in Elbira. What struck me most, Anani writes, was my inability to relate the aerial point of view to the familiar landscape of Balur, where I lived most of my childhood. Although the landscape had been altered dramatically, I felt helpless by my incapacity to understand the landscape in that image through its topographic features. This drove the idea of the exhibition that could be a means of enabling us to understand how the Palestinian landscape has been first perceived and then transformed from the sky. End quote. Above, then, as described by Anani, is a positionality that places the eye and its gaze in the sky while looking down, a point that I shall return to in a moment. And so apparently the curious seed was planted for what became this exhibition. What does Palestine look like above, gazing down? This positionality produced this exhibition, moving from surveillance to mapping, hovering around the idea of conquest and perhaps working to manipulate it in various ways. But as Yazid mentioned in the quote, he found himself helpless in his incapacity to understand the landscape in this kind of representation, almost as if Palestine from above is so removed from Palestine from below that they are imperceivable to each other. As the next iteration of the exhibition goes up in Istanbul, transported from Ramallah to Turkey, I keep wondering about the process of moving through the air and through all the means we have in moving and mobility and lack thereof. How is it the part of the gaze from above and how it was subverted from Ramallah adds in different kinds of subversion in Istanbul? As Zeynep, Salim, and Yazid described beautifully earlier, how does a representation of this above space shift when the venue of the exhibition shifts? That is, what is local about Palestine from above, and thus what is lost or found in translation and and replacement? And what changes come about in translation and transport? What does not? As Palestine from above moved from its original home in Ramallah to this impressive space in Istanbul, the exhibition, the representations, and the ideas moved from the local confines of Palestine into a regional and international context of representation of Palestine, keeping in mind the rich and layered past or history that initially informed the exhibition. I want to return again to Yazid in his second introduction, where he says, quote, through displaying works by artists alongside historical archival material, the exhibition attempts to subvert the power of writing history and documenting society and landscape by the different regimes of power, end quote. And so this is my first claim in my own intervention, and one I observed in reading and engaging with the exhibition while it was on display in the Countdown Foundation in Ramallah several years ago. This exhibition was one of historians, and it was a watershed in exhibition practice in Palestine, for whatever worth that term is in thinking. I think what it means is it's not a return to history, but rather a return to historiography and historicism, neither revision nor reproduction. History is a constant in a cultural conceptualization in Palestine. History always matters. It's always been a subtext, if not an overt context of exhibition practice. But here I see the invitation in the how and the why, and not just the what of that context or subtext. Salim Tamari's imprint on the exhibition was profound for me. While respecting, of course, every hand involved, including Yazid and Zeynep, but it's been Salim who intervened boldly and with great care regarding social history. He's guided us into considering longer narratives, to reconsidering the Ottoman past, to read through and beyond the layers of Arab nationalist influence. And he's guided us in how we imagined our most recent and less recent Palestinian pasts, The plural here is, of course, of great significance as an emancipatory intervention. Salim, among others, provided a literal landscape of historical considerations, writings, and implications that do not just fill books, though they do fill books. But with this exhibition and its influence, we also see how this active intellectualism fills gallery spaces, widening our imaginative possibilities for thinking through the past, with the present, and into the future. This flows into my next point regarding maps and mapping from above. So from above, mapping Jerusalem, and by extension Palestine, is at the heart of the Holy Land, has become a landscape of Oriental imaginations and military incursions. These maps are the commodities produced from power, a way of marking the land to control it. These kinds of maps seek to define relations of power with place, relegating the people on and of the land as an afterthought. As a result, map making and cartography have a layered legacy in Palestine. Power, not people, can be read through these kinds of maps. Benedict Anderson explains that this colonial legacy of maps is connected to conquest and domination. As he describes, maps and census shape the grammar of colonial state power, end quote. Controlling space through mapping and controlling populations through counting were and remain intrinsically connected. Edward Said explained at the precipice of colonial power, we find the representations of maps of their imagined geographies. And his famous quote, "It is Europe that articulates the Orient." European imagination created the science of Orientalism, which has had long-lasting effects throughout the geographies that European colonialism invaded. Long before Zionist settler colonialism invasion onto and into the land of Palestine, the rich and long history of the Ottoman past in the region witnessed several kinds of interests in map making. However, according to Salim Tamari, only with the drive towards European-style modernity in the 19th century did maps take on the functional value for commercial and military purposes. Travel maps and ethnographic cartography, of course, existed long before the Ottoman Empire's Tanzimat era of bureaucratic changes towards constructing a modern nation state. This important so-called reform movement in Ottoman history needs to be read in the longer historical narrative of the Ottoman past, and not just or only in relation to European states. Nevertheless, the attempts by the Ottoman rulers in the mid-19th century at adopting European-style nation-state governments changed the value of maps for the empire. In all of these iterations, Palestine was always a part of something much larger, sometimes marked distinctly, but always a part of a larger geography in the region. The changes within our Ottoman cartography also coupled by a continuation of the Crusader legacy of mapping for the desire of conquest in and of the Holy Land. In the subsequent settler colonial context of Zionist attempts at conquest in the 20th century, controlling how the land is represented and quite literally marked and named has been a foundational tool in the arsenal of settler erasure in Palestine. Both in terms of the colonial history of maps and the settler colonial urgency and elimination, place and peoplehood have been targeted for over a century in Palestine. To overcome the imposed power of European modernity, it is key to understand the multifaceted legacy of this power in Palestine and on the Palestinian people. The historical maps of the region are an archive of the contemporary legacy of Orientalism and the violence of settler invasion. The military legacy of mapping and map making is part and parcel of the settler colonial logics of discovery and conquest. Given this history, the conventional duty of these maps is to measure space towards the goal of controlling it, whereby distance become a metric of exclusion and power. Rather than adhere to the idea of mapping to control the land, I propose in my work on ongoing return that the concept of emotional maps can work to generate proximity to the land and chart out layers of lived stories that nurture the act and idea of sharing the past to survive the present and imagine futures on and with the land. Not lost on us in this current iteration of the genocidal violence against Palestine and the targeting of everything Palestinian are the gaze from above in Gaza and the northern West Bank, where the spectacle of ruins and destructions become an overwhelming, unbearable, and cruel realization of settler intentions. From mapping for conquest, what we know of the past few years have offered us is another kind of approach of from above. Reverse engineering, I think it's called, where the technologies of conquest have turned on the masters of that technology, from the Hudhud drones of Hezbollah to the strategic mapping of resistance from Gaza. A new day has dawned in Palestine, and the reckoning has been massive. Conquest and its unbearable violence double down in this current iteration of the genocide. But it is no longer only conquest. Perhaps it never was. It is an attempted annihilation, the now famous eliminatory concept of settler colonialism in practice. Palestine from Above in 2025 reveals a kind of brutality and relentless violence of a military settler colonial entity that is more vengeful and full of blood hatred than we perhaps considered possible before 2023. But it is also a refusal to allow the skies and the land that we live in and for to be controlled by the monsters. Nevertheless, without accountability and without a light at the end of the tunnel of this war, the settler state is working to transform Palestine from above into a speculative act of the killing fields. As we gather in this space full of artist rendering, it might be useful now to turn to the poets. In The Earth is Closing In on Us, Mahmoud Darwish writes, "Our star will hang up mirrors. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky?" In his preface to the 1999 edition of After the Last Sky, originally published in 1986, Edward Said explained that in his first time back to Palestine in 1992, he was, quote, "filled with melancholy, but was nevertheless not despondent," end quote. Later in this preface, he wrote, "Looking at After the Last Sky as objectively as possible, I find that it may be something of a source book for the Palestinian condition, and an attempt to render that condition not from the viewpoint of policymakers, but that of memorists and unregimented historians. It is an unreconciled book in which the contradictions and antinomies of our lives and experience remain as they are, assembled neither, I hope, into neat wholes nor into sentimental rumination about the past. Fragments, memories, disjointed scenes, intimate particulars," end quote. And so we wonder, to speak about history and mapping as disciplines, is it different from above than it is from below? History with a capital H is used as a tool of erasure. The provocation here is to think about documentation. In my talk and in this exhibition, how can documentation actually serve the regimes of violent erasure? Even though contradictorily, we know that we must work to document everything that is happening. In this backdrop, or perhaps in the front of our minds, we're gathering in this setting where knowledge sharing and artistic intentions and reckoning and production are coveted, or should be coveted, or were once coveted. We gather knowing that the resonance of every space of sharing in Gaza is being targeted and destroyed in this genocidal madness, with tools drawn from the same toolbox that now threaten everyone worldwide. The very idea of knowledge production and academic freedom lay under the rubble of Gaza. This is not just about Palestine, but it is also very much about Palestine. The violence and the death of the old, cruel world is fueled by anti-Palestinian hatred, and that is not a point that should be lost on anyone as we consider concepts like racism, fascism, and authoritarianism. And so while it is not a question of representation using the tools of the old world, history with a capital H and mapping, I want this to become a question of horizons. The contradictions we face in terms of documentation as we work to share this despair, this madness, the insanity of pornographic violence, but we also work to know that it is not all that we are. We are simply not what has been done unto us. And therein, perhaps we can move from the above to the below and find that the horizon is the one that grounds us as we learn how to fly and offers us an otherwise way of being. To do so, to live in the horizon and not to work in the work of representation. One must linger in history just for a little bit longer. History is a reflection, like a mirror for the present, a past imagined to fit into a reflection. I want to think about this mirror with you today and think with others who tried, however horrific it is, to reflect on this mirror's reflection. Walter Benjamin tells us, quote, reflection shows us that our image of happiness is thoroughly colored by the time to which the course of our own existence has assigned us. The kind of happiness that could arouse envy in us exists only in the air we have breathed. The same applies to our view of the past, which is the concern of history. The past carries with it a temporal index by which it is referred to as redemption. In this concept of history, sometimes referred to as a thesis on the philosophy of history, Benjamin goes on to explain, for every image of the past that is not recognized by the present as one of its own concerns threatens to disappear irretrievably. Begging the question, whose redemption does history seek? Whose mirror is being reflected? And what can mirrors possibly offer us? To return to Said, to be unregimented is to assemble, but not to do so neatly. Neat and linear assembly is the fodder for settler modernity. Settler temporality, as we know, is part and parcel of this modernity. Context expands this methodology to include 1492, 1619, year zeros, as it were, how monsters were born and how our worlds were forever changed by them. In Palestine, we can add several other years to this colonial timeline. The linear track of stealing lives and stealing ways of being as they steal time to define time. But we are not mere victims of some power's definition of time that exists and is meant to disappear us. We are here and we are screaming. And this complicates my presentation today, hopefully and necessarily, as we explore the complication between capital H history and us, past and present and future. This is an uprising against history, a revolutionary practice that works to trace revolutionary acts, rebellions, uprisings, and refusals to succumb to the capital H of history as we move from Palestine from above to thinking of Palestine from below. And as a final provocation, let us hold on to the words of Etel Adnan in the Apocalypse. Etel wrote at the end of the Arab apocalypse, when the sun will run its ultimate road, fire will devour beasts, plants, and stones. Fire will devour the fire and its perfect circle. When the perfect circle would catch fire, no angel will manifest itself. Stop. The sun will extinguish the gods, the angels, and men, and will extinguish itself in the midst of its daughters. Matter spirit will become the night, and in the night we shall find knowledge, love, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rana, for what I'm trying to sort of frame maybe now as a textological canvas, bringing so many colors, tones, textures all together in this wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Rana. I'm checking if there are some questions in the Q&A. No, no questions. I think it's an opportunity for the three, Rana and Hanan, I invite you to sort of turn on your cameras and mics, please. Thank you. Well, thank you for this wonderful presentations and talks and texts that you've shared with us. And I think there's this sort of connection between both of you and what we've done at the exhibition. And it's the question of what Hanan was mentioning at the beginning. So thinking otherwise, what to build otherwise, how to think otherwise, and what to do otherwise. And I think it is collected somehow, as Rana said, with our long history of recording, safeguarding, documenting, and telling and retelling, and insisting of retelling in our way. So storytelling is the essence of our persistence to move the body of knowledge that we think that it should really move to the future, and safeguarding it to reach other generation, reach other horizons, maybe. This is something that is also answering the question back of what to do today and what to build for our future. So my question to both of you, I mean, Hanan, you're an academic and you're working with culture and exhibition. Also, you're looking at museology, exhibition making, cultural production. And Rana, as a historian who also worked in a museum, and you're lately looking at also the body of work of so many of the artists, such as Itel Adnan, Kamal Bullata, and others. So how do you sort of look at, I mean, you're talking about cartography and mapping and the way, you know, as a discipline, but then I think of exhibition, also exhibition practices as a sort of an emotional map or emotional, that sort of have a constellation of artworks, films, videos, archives, and put together in a dialogue in a certain constellation that creates a sort of an argument, and it's created so many dialogues between these different components of the exhibition. So can you tell us more about exhibition practices, Hanan, and how exhibition practices sort of play with that kind of way of storytelling, which is really different than that of academic texts or historians as historical text, etc., etc.
Well, thank you so much, Yazid, for this question. And then it's so awesome to be with you on the same panel. I'm not sure I can answer the question sort of in its entirety, but I'll just maybe give it a go by saying first that it's always interesting to me that in the classroom, we don't use until recently, let's say, okay? I think it's become much more common now that we do use exhibitions in classroom teaching, right? And I think, for example, with an exhibition like this, it does so much more to be able to reach, especially a younger audience who simply cannot read or taught reading practices the way that we have been. It sounds quite superficial, perhaps, or it sounds, you know, sort of maybe a big judgment on this generation, but I think it's something I grapple with every day in my teaching and in the classroom. But this isn't because the exhibition or the practice of that you sort of follow the curatorial practices in the show are any less sort of dense material. I think the way the stories are framed and the way you're able to bring two generations together is actually a lot more expansive, right? Then you might sometimes just get by assigning one reading, for example, or asking students or even the public to read, you know, in a sort of a history novel. I know I'm sharing the panel with historians, and I know I'm probably saying something really, you know, really controversial, but I am saying this, of course, knowing, and this applies not just to discipline, not just to the history discipline, to be sort of honest about this. I think all disciplines are suffering from this right now, but I just want to maybe just say that the sort of again, the curatorial sort of decisions, the focus of the exhibition, all of that is learning material. Not only is it an archive, but it's fathomable. It's fathomable. You can walk. I mean, I don't know how many of our audience have actually gone to see the exhibition, but I deeply encourage you to do that. It just sort of collapses the history in a way, and what it does is it tells you, if you're interested in this, then there's a lot more on this particular point or this. So I found this very fascinating as I walked through this exhibition. And I felt like, my God, I want to go back and now study every single story told in here. Why didn't I know this? Why didn't I know that? And yet it's all within this one space. At times it gets crowded, you feel, but that's part of sort of the story the exhibition is telling about the sort of intensity and denseness of the material. So yeah, this is just, yeah, I hope I kind of answered your question or what you're asking.
I could add just one word, I guess. It's awesome to be in conversation, Kaman. This is the second time Hanan and I are in conversation about such things, and this is ongoing with Yazid, is that the word contradiction is what was in my head the entire time I was experiencing the exhibition while it was on display in Ramallah. And that is generative. Contradiction is something that is entirely incredibly generative. So keeping that in mind, there's just 2 points that I think I can make to engage what Hanan was saying, which is Palestine from above as a script to study. I taught it this past semester to graduate students, so they did have to read. And there was a lot of material for them to read with, but we were reading it alongside novels. So we were engaging it and we were trying to engage it in a critical eye, textually. And I know that Yazid might have something to say about that because I do engage things textually. But it was interesting because the imaginative component in an exhibition is more material for students than it is in a historical novel, because there's material to be engaged. And therein lies the contradiction of trying to do something historical, which I think was the profound, like I said when I was speaking, that's not to say history has always been a part of, I think personally, exhibition practice in Palestine. I think the historicism and historiography part of this, which is a question of representation, became really material in this exhibition, and it celebrated the generativeness of contradiction as opposed to running away from it. So instead of living under the title or the label of Orientalism, it explored the methods and methodology of Orientalism and how it echoes and resonates. And that's the second point that I can make, which is another homage to Salim Tamari, because he brought up Dalman and Tawfiq Canaan. And it's true, we have in the Birzeit University Museum been working with the Canaan collection, and it's been a constant contradiction. And at some point you have to we did reading sessions, which enabled us to think through contradictions and to think beyond labels, and to see Orientalism both through method and methodology, and to see how we can think about that aesthetically as well as material, like intellectually. And so I think that's what the exhibition offered the most of, sort of learning how to work through, live through, and experience contradiction as a generative thing, and not, and therein in the teaching process this past semester, it enabled me to sort of put two concepts next to each other, which is hypocrisy and contradiction, to see the difference between them. And again, this is where I think the above and below, what I tried to do in this intervention is to think neither from above nor from below, and to think through the horizon, which connects them both, which I think offers us a way out of representation, which is the tools of the master.
There's one question. My question is why Ottoman archives and maps are rarely used in such studies. I wonder what is the obstacle.
Can we invite Salim Tamari back into this conversation, because he's used Ottoman archives really thoroughly.
Çelik as well. Please.
Zeynep, Akid, Zeynep.
If I may intervene here, I think Ottoman archival materials have been used more and more in exhibitions, especially exhibitions done by Anamed. So I urge you to revisit the catalogs of these exhibitions. You'll be pleasantly surprised. What I think is unique about this exhibition is to bring together the archival material with contemporary artwork. Other than that, yes, Ottoman history is a very big field, and there are lots of visual materials too that can be used in the exhibitions. And I mean, I was involved in one exhibition at Anamed, Camera Ottomana, where we dealt with Ottoman archival material, and there are many others. So please do have a look at the past work. Thank you.
Salim.
Yes, I think the question needs to examine the huge number of studies in the last 10 years which have actually responded to this issue of using the Ottoman archives to cover ethnography, aerial photography, cultural theories of progress and modernity, using the Istanbul and Ankara Ottoman archives. So the main answer to this question is that until recently, there's been a strong current of Arab nationalist historiography and Turkish nationalist historiography, which were blinded by the need to look at the past in colonial terms, subsuming both the Ottoman regime in the Middle East and the Arab responses to it in colonial terms. And the revision to this vision, if we may say, by a large number of people like Osama Maqdisi, Rashid Khaldi, Adil Manna, Shara Dumani, who have rethought the relationship of the Arab lands to the Ottoman regime, has made great, innovative, new ways of looking at this past in a way that can be seen clearly in the Palestine from Above exhibit in Istanbul. And as Zeynep said, we have injected a very important component, an Ottoman component in it, first in Ramallah, but particularly in Istanbul, to rectify this past negligence and past marginalization of this subject. So in addition to Zeynep's work on Ottomania, I want to make another propaganda suggestion for our book, which deals with the subject, Camera Palestina, which also appeared recently. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. There's another question also. I think it's a follow-up on the first question. How do we assess the data presented, especially photos of Hijazi railways? And I think before answering this, I think this is Zeynep's domain. In the way we looked at historical document, at least myself as a curator, and not a historian like my fellow colleagues, I always tend to make sure that these documents are not only read by and interpreted by historians, regardless to their backgrounds, but how artists really respond to these historical materials, something that I'm always interested in. And in our exhibition, you see that such historical materials and their different interpretation historically, academically, let's say, is also juxtaposed with artistic interpretations. And the Hijazi railway is really part of that kind of relationship. And we made sure also to have images or films by the Lumiere brothers, regardless to their interpretation. But then when you look at them and you look at other films by the Lumiere brothers that are from Palestine as well, documenting their interest in how the trains are moving with the early cameras that they have, putting them with Salim's Tamari's presentation on a railway that was established temporarily between Jerusalem and Al-Bire, that was a sort of deducted from a folkloric material that Salim found also from folkloric material, I think in Ash al-Usra, maybe, I'm not sure which book.
Wedding songs.
Wedding songs from an Ash al-Usra. And so, I mean, we're trying to sort of look at history from all folklorically, artistically, and then we put all these things together and try to find out how these materials sort of react to each for each one of us, and how can we look at what horizons, as Rana said, can be opened from looking at that kind of mix and mishmash of so many things together. Zeynep, please.
What was how do we access the photographs? Well, I don't know where the person who asked this question is based, but I'm assuming that he is not in Istanbul, so come and visit the exhibition. It's open until the end of January, so it's open for a long time. Now, aside from that, can you reach these historic photographs? Well, there is quite a bit in the Ottoman archives. Abdülhamit's albums are and others are in the Istanbul University's rare works collection, and there's a lot of stuff there. But there's an easy way to reach them too. Not all of them. Some of them, a selection of these albums are in the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress has made them available to the public. It's very easy to reach that collection. So I would suggest that you do that first. And then a lot of them are in private hands. So, it's a little bit of luck. Other major collections like Atatürk Library in Istanbul has albums. They're everywhere. And in fact, a quick Google search will lead you to the right places.
Yazid, you're muted.
I'm trying to see if there are other questions. If not, I would really like to say if any one of you have their own questions to any one of us. Hanan, Rana, Barakat, Salim, do you have questions? You normally do.
I just have my gratitude to share with Zeynep, Salim, Hanan, and Yazid. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. And thank you to the audience and their questions, of course. I am curious, maybe Barakat, you can tell us something about this. I am curious about what the reaction has been in Istanbul and who's been visiting mostly, and if there's been anything written about the show in Turkish papers, actually.
Yeah.
In local papers. I'm very curious.
And indeed, as Emir told at the very beginning of his talk, right after the opening of the exhibition, it was crazy times in Turkey and especially in Istanbul. We have rallies, we have earthquake and everything, but against all odds, it is very well received. And there are nice pieces on the newspapers, both from, let's say, secular and conservative papers. That is the nice part of it. That's what we were trying to do indeed. So the reaction is quite well, but it is good that it's going to be open long enough. And I think in time, during summertime, in the fall, the visitor numbers will be increasing. But also with this one, I'm planning to close the panel with this news. And also the last questions was about the catalog. So you all know we opened the exhibition in a very, very short time. So we couldn't find time to prepare a catalog. But taking the opportunity of the long duration of the exhibition and the questions coming from the audience of the exhibition, visitors of the exhibition, we are encouraged to prepare a catalog for the Istanbul exhibition. And this is not going to be an ordinary catalog, let's say, not just the exhibition itself, but also in this catalog, we will include some selected texts from this panel. So maybe also the last question about the Hijaz railways and how can we read these presentations and so on. So I may say that if they wait until the fall, until October, they can reach the catalog. But So far, it's going well. I hope it's going to increase in time. Any other comments from other members of ANAMET team? I don't know. Because they can observe better. They are there every day. I'm a little bit far.
If I may add something, what was really interesting about the visitors is how much time they spent at the exhibition. 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours. I left after a while, but I saw people taking notes and just absorbing the material. It was very flattering, I must say.
There's another question, one last question by Yahya Koch. Here's my question I think this is for Rana. To what extent was Palestine used as a historical geographical designation prior to the 20th century? It seems to me that the concept was reproduced in a literature shaped by Orientalism and Zionism under the shadow of imperialism, serving the slogan of a land without people, and now it appears to have become irreversible, embedded in our collective consciousness, much like the term Middle East. I believe the focus, especially in times like these, should be on the human condition. Geographical designations often serve the interest of political and military powers. Rana, do you have a comment on that?
I do, and with all due respect and humility, to make a comment in front of Salim, and I leave the stage to Salim, but my comment is that Palestine as a nation state or as a state is trapped in that modernity that you're talking about, but Palestine as a concept and as a culture far exceeds the history of Zionism, the history of settler colonialism, and the history of modernity, and somebody like Salim has shown us this. And Palestine is the human condition. So right now, I think, given the fact that there's a genocide that's happening to the Palestinian people, this notion of humanity and the human condition is one that is defined by what happens here and what is happening. And that's why I was sort of crudely perhaps referring to the misquote of Gramsci of an old world dying and a new world struggling to be born, because that world is dying here and the struggle for it to be born shall come from here as well. And if that's not the human condition, I'm not sure what is. Succinct enough.
Salim?
Well, I think it's very significant that this exhibit moved to Istanbul and that people, we could see it in our own eyes in that opening night when people were coming and pondering their own past and its relationship not only to Palestine, but the whole Arab world. And I think one contribution that this exhibit may have contributed is to make people rethink this past through the fog of nationalist historiography and ideological impositions which have been brought on us. So if that happens, I think it will be a great achievement. And I would like just to add that I want to thank from my heart the two keynote presentations by Rana and Hanan, but also we should not forget the ANAMED team. First and foremost, Zeynep Çelik, who was the dynamo behind bringing this exhibit to Istanbul, but also the silent work by Buket, Emir, help me with the
Ebrar,
Abrar, and we should never, and Erkin, of course, we should never forget the other Zeynep, who I wish was with us tonight, but her contribution was very crucial. So I thank you all and hope to see you soon in Istanbul.
Okay. I think now it's time to close the panel. Once again, from my side, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you our keynote speakers, Hanan Toukan, Rana Barakat, and our moderator, Yazid Anani, for this insightful, touching talks and discussions. Some final announcements before closing the panel. First, you can watch this panel via Anamet's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. I said the catalog news, but let me repeat it. The exhibition was realized in a very short time. We couldn't find time to publish a catalog of the Istanbul exhibition. And now we take the opportunity of the long exhibition period to set to work on its publication preparations. It will be an exhibition catalog, including the selected texts from this panel. We hope to see the catalog on the shelves in October. Dear audience, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition yet, who are out of Istanbul maybe, it is open till the end of January 2026, and I hope our panel sparks some curiosity to visit the exhibition. Okay, this is the end. Thank you once more to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
so
Thank you
much.
to everybody. Thank you to the translators as well for
Oh,
translating.
thank you,
Yeah.
Torta. Yeah.